Good afternoon. All right, today we're working on basics. We're going to paint. This is for a client of mine. They are going obviously in the grays, and we're going to take care of some simple end tables. This particular one, we actually have glass in it, and I've taken the glass out. We'll do something fun with that later, do a little reverse painting, stenciling on that. But right now, we're going to go with a charcoal gray. And I've got Rust-Oleum's chalk paint, which is the first chalk paint that I ever used. And I'm back at it again. It's a good, solid, I mean, look at how thick this paint is. Good, solid paint, gives pretty good coverage, and is pretty affordable. You got to really mix it up. I haven't used this in a while, so it's been sitting. But you want to make sure you get it all together. All the pigments usually fall to the bottom. So what I've done on this piece so far is I cleaned it really good with a TSP cleaner and water, and then rinsed it off. I turned it upside down, cleaned everything, and then it had a lot of love on it. And then I went and put on a couple of coats of Dixie Belle's Boss. It's a blocker stain. Here we go. It's Dixie Belle's primer that you can put on wood, and Boss stands for blocking odors. Blocking odors, stains, and stops bleed through. So this piece, I was afraid we were going to get a little bit of bleed through, because when I was cleaning it, it wasn't just dirt that I was pulling off. I was pulling off kind of a brownish, I think it was the stain, or at least it was the top coat on it. So I was a little bit worried that that was going to come on through. So I put 2 coats of that on, and I let it sit for 24 hours to make sure it got dry and activated. And then it primes my surface for paint. All right, now mixed it up and get rid of this. All right, I got my favorite round brush. This is a Zinsser brush, zebra brush, sorry. And it's really good for spindles, chair rungs, things like that. This really gets in all the corners. Got my Mr. bottle. I'm keeping my brush damp on this, and we're gonna go in and just start painting. This is a really neutral, great color. It's not black, it's just a charcoal, and I really like it because it goes with a lot of decor. And this particular client of mine, we're redoing their house with a lot of grays, which is a really popular color right now, and this will work out really well. We've actually got 3 of these tables, plus a sofa table, and then we got another coffee table that's in a little bit of a different style. But the nice thing about it is that you can use furniture of different styles, and if you paint it all the same, then it's as good as having a match set, I think. It gives a little bit of interest, but it doesn't look hodgepodge. It really ends up being pretty cohesive, and I think that is really nice, because we've all got furniture that we've gathered over the years, and it doesn't all quite match. I've got my little furniture rollers here. You want to make sure you get in all the nooks and crannies, obviously. And these tables are deceptively simple looking, but when you start getting in it and you realize you got to paint all the rungs, you got to get in and paint the inside of the lip, and just a lot of different pieces. So what we end up doing, what I end up doing, is going ahead and getting as much as I can get, and then I'll turn the table upside down, and at that point in time, I can get at it from a different angle, make sure I haven't missed anything, and it's so much easier to get at a lot of the interior bottom spots. This is a very popular table style. You can see the bottom's got the kind of that cane look, and believe it or not, we can paint that, and it comes out really nice looking. At least I think it's really nice looking. This has got really good coverage. We will go over and do 2 coats, but I'm telling you, this looks really good. Normally, I'm spritzing my brush a lot, but on this first coat with the Rust-Oleum paint, you don't really need to do that too much. You want to make sure you get a good solid coverage. And because I put the primer down, this paint is really attaching well to the surface. I really like that look of it. When you go through, you want to make sure that you don't have any drips. So that's one thing that you don't want to put the paint on too thick, because then you end up with drips at that point in time, and then you're going back and fixing it. And you can do brush strokes in a lot of different ways on these pieces, because these paints are self-leveling, which means that as it dries, it'll smooth out. But if you put too much on, it also means that the drips will end up gathering behind your back, so to speak. So, like I said, you got a lot of things in the background. You got to really get around all edges. But this brush I love because it really does a lot of the work for you. I painted some other tables months ago before I had a brush like this with just a flat one. And I'm telling you, it was so much harder than this is. This is just a breeze, as you can see. So I was saying, I'm not going to paint the whole table in front of you today because it gets really boring. But when you do the cane part, one of the things you want to do is you can do different directions, but then you're going to want to really scrub that paintbrush in, because you've got to get all the way through to the backing of this cane and make sure you haven't missed any spots. And that's one way you go, scrubbing clockwise and then back counterclockwise, and that's usually a good sense on how you can get in there and make sure you don't have any missing spots. Okay, and I've got it up on my little dollies, holding up the legs, and that makes it nice because then I can get all the way down to the bottom and paint the feet. So but this is, this is something that's really simple to do. I mean, I know it's fun to do a lot of artistic touches, but I tell you, you just come in and you just get a coat of paint on a piece of furniture, and that really updates it tremendously and makes you fall in love with your furniture again. So that's it for right now. Good morning. So I wanted to show you a little bit more the next step on this gray table. I talk about how I turn things upside down, especially on tables and chairs, to paint because there's so much that you miss. So that's what I've done. So I've got my brush that I kept in my baggie to keep it moist so I don't have to wash it quite so fast. And we got our paint, and we're going to catch all of the spots with our second coat. So we know we've got full coverage on this. So when you've got spindles, these little crevices, sometimes you can miss them when you're painting this way, right side up. So you want to hit them both ways. And that's what we're doing here. I usually paint over the edge. Oh, here we go, I'm already painting myself. But I don't really paint that whole bottom part. You know, there's a point where you do have to stop. But these deep crevices in here, it's funny when you turn the table over how much you see you've missed one side or the other when you swear you've gotten it all. So that's what we're doing. But this round brush that I'm in love with for spindles just really gets good coverage. Now your second coat is a little trickier to put on because you got to pay attention to what you paint and what you haven't painted. And sometimes it's hard to tell. So do it in some kind of an order so that you make sure that you've gotten everywhere. If you've got really good lights, and here's where I say one of the most important pieces of equipment you can get is lighting. When I started doing this, I was painting in the basement. I was painting in areas that didn't have great light. And I tell you, when you bring the pieces up and out into the light, it makes a huge amount of difference. So we got some professional lights in here that Chip had from his seminar things that he was doing online, and they came in really handy. I know a lot of people use ring lights. We haven't gotten that yet just because we had these great professional lights already. So, and when you're doing your second coat, it's going to be a little bit of a lighter coat. It doesn't have to be quite as thick. Of course, it helps if your water bottle doesn't keep spamming into the piece. So you want to mist it just a little bit. You don't need to mist the furniture necessarily, but you want to mist your brush. Because when you feel it dragging, and dragging is something that's hard to explain, you just got to get out there and paint and you'll know. When your brush starts dragging, it's time to get a little more moisture on the brush. And with chalk paint, it dries really quick, and it's also pretty heavy. Now the thing that you got to remember too is that when you're doing your second coat and you're using water, you're pretty much going to reactivate whatever's underneath there. So just keep that in mind, that you know you want to get paint everywhere, but you also don't want to overwork it where you're brushing and brushing and brushing and you end up lifting off the previous layer of paint. So that's just another little tip that you've got to be aware of. And these are mistakes that you tend to make in the beginning, and over time, you know, it just becomes second nature when you start painting a lot. Getting back to the lights, the good thing about the lights is that you can see at an angle what parts are wet. So like when I'm talking and trying to talk and paint at the same time, that's always a danger zone because I got paint dripping. So, and these rollers are great, but sometimes they do get a little bit off balance. So having it wet paint, it tells you where you've been and where you still need to go. But being that it should dry in about 20 minutes, if you've got a piece that's pretty intense and 20 minutes have gone by and you're still painting around, you may lose sight of that wetness, that wet look. I am getting the inside of the piece underneath and maybe overkill, but because there's going to be a glass top on this table, you just never know people's angle of where their eye is going to be able to see. And while it's not important to paint this, it's important to paint things that people may see through the glass, because it's kind of jarring to see all charcoal and then you see a nice little patch of brown. You're like, what the heck? So we're going to get the second coat on this puppy, and then I'll come back and talk about sealing. Okay, now it's time for a top coat. We've got 2 coats of the charcoal, the Rust-Oleum charcoal. Oh, as we saw before, put that right out there. on here, and I flipped it upside down. I got the underneath parts. I really scrubbed into the base here where we've got the cane look, because there's a mesh, it's like a mesh, and then there's a backing underneath it, and you really, if you don't want little specks of brown to come through, you really need to scrub into it. So next, I am using Dixie Belle's Clear Coat in Satin. So I'm going to give it one quick coat of this. It looks white and it goes on white, which is kind of nice, so you can tell where you've been, where you're going. But it dries clear. So normally I'd use a flat brush with this, but because we've got spindles and all kinds of things going on here, I need to really get it in the corners. And the reason for the top coat is going to be to give it some protection. And we'll get it all out here. And one of the things you do is you get it on the piece, and then you check and make sure you don't have any pooling, any drips. But you kind of want to really just paint it on the whole surface. When you're on flat surfaces, you really want to make sure you do long, even strokes, so you don't get a lot of weird brush strokes that you can see at an angle when it dries. So, and it dries pretty fast, so you don't have a lot of working time with this, but you can do it with, apply it with a moist brush and keep your brush moist. That'll prevent it from dragging, and dragging on a top coat's really not good, because then you get really a lot of weird, a weird texture, and you don't want that. So I'm starting with a base coat basically on this, we call it a top coat, but it's going to be the first coat. Because this is a side table that could get a lot of usage, I'm probably going to go ahead and give it a coat on top of this of the gator hide, which is Dixie Belle's most strongest top coat. It's water repellent, and you know, people use this to set their drinks on, things like that. And these people that I'm doing this piece for have pets, so pets do tend to be a little harder on household items like furniture. So we want to make sure they don't, you know, scratch it. The chalk paint itself, you got to be careful with it for the first 21 or so days. I mean, it dries right away, but it's got to cure. So there's a cure time in this, and it gets hard as nails. But you still would like to put a top coat on it just to protect it. And there's a number of different top coats I use. There's one that I really like, and unfortunately I've run out of it. I got it on order, which is a hemp oil. And that is really great for dark colors like this, because it really brings out the color. And the grays, the blacks, the purples, you know, dark blues, things like that. So I will show you that as soon as that order comes in, what that look is. But this is a satin finish, so it's going to dry not real shiny. Now if I put the gator hide on it, it will have more of a shine to it. But I'm just going to try and get all the surfaces and just put a thin coat on. I'm really just getting a little bit on the tip of my brush so it doesn't make a mess all over the place. And it doesn't pool up. And a little definitely goes a long way. So I'm going to crawl around on the floor and get this top coat on. And then we'll be ready for the final act. So stay tuned. Okay, our table has a glass insert in the top, and I've taken it off so we could paint it, and it's got a beveled edge to it, and I don't know if you can see that, but what we're going to do is reverse paint it. The bevel edge is on the top here, and then it's the other side of the glass is flat. So I'm going to put it, because we're going to do it on the bottom side of the glass, because that way it's protected. Nobody will touch it, scratch it, whatever. And I am going to use this fleur-de-lis stencil. That's one of my favorites. We're trying to recreate a piece that, actually a set of pieces that I've already done. And I'm not going to use the entire stencil. I'm just going to use the center portion of it. So what we're going to do is get this puppy centered on, first I need to center the glass. We got an optical illusion going on. All right, then I want to center the stencil. And you can do this by measuring. I just don't necessarily have the patience for that. And there are some guidelines in here that I can use. And that looks about right. And then what we're going to do is tape it in place so it doesn't move. And I actually kind of leave the tape that I've already got, because sometimes I like it to not be completely the stickiest tape in the world. So it pulls back up pretty easily. So, having said that, all right, I want just the center piece, and I want to make sure it stays down and doesn't move on me, because I'm using paint on this one. I like to use the mousses and the on stencils because it's really thick, and it doesn't get underneath the stencil and bleed through. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go back with, I've got a white Dixie Belle's Fluff. It's kind of a white that's got a little gray in it. So it's not their whitest white, but it's got just a tinge of gray, which is good because we've got a charcoal table. And to do the stencil, what I've got one of these little spongy things. These you can buy like a dozen of them for like $3 or something like that. So they're good throwaways, but sometimes I tend to reuse mine. So I'm dipping it in the paint, but then I'm also brushing off so I just don't have very much on my sponge, because too much paint will bleed right underneath that stencil. But I'm going to try and hold it in place, and then I'm going to just use a pouncing, oh, this feels a little wet, hang on. We really want to do more of a dry brush in a sense on this, and that feels awfully wet. Yeah, that feels awfully wet. I need to dry that up. Pardon me. This is the fun of live. All right. We want it a real dry. And you'll see when we get this, but I moistened this sponge brush ahead of time. And sometimes, okay, that's better. All right, so you got a bit of a pouncing motion, and there's really, if you can see this, there's not very much paint going on at all. It almost looks like a powder. That's kind of the effect that you want to get, because then it won't try and sneak underneath your stencil. And you'll get the nice crisp edges. And look at it, just doesn't take any amount of paint at all. And you just keep pouncing all the way through. This is a real quick and easy way to get a nice decorative effect. And it's also going to look a little faded, which is kind of my goal. Sometimes you don't really want perfection. You just want something that's kind of looks a little faded, a little aged on it. So I'm thinking that that's good. Okay. Let's see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. All right, so with the tape, here again, you want to loosen things up and get it off right away. Lift it off. Ooh. All right, so you can see, I got to clean this up a little bit. And if you just really totally mess up on it, you know, you can just wipe it all off and start again if you need to. But like I said, less is more with this to get the clean edges. Now this is not going to be perfection. All right, so that's the reverse side. That's the front side. And there's a lot of effects you can do. You can do something like this, and then if you want to have the glass covered around it, you can go ahead and spray on top of this, let it dry, and then spray on top of this a silver or black or anything you want, and then you end up with a whole background effect. Here, I just really wanted it where you could see through it so that when we put it in the table, let's see if we can set this down without too many fingerprints on it. And see, sometimes you're better off just leaving it. I'm probably going to go back and redo this again off camera when I can focus a little bit better. But there you go, a finished table. Simple, yet elegant. And a far cry from where we started. All right, that's all for now.
And guys, here's a finished product from the Duchess.